Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're going to talk about our top 3 albums of 2024. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So 2024 has been an absolutely fantastic year for music. There's been a bunch of stuff, a bunch of great albums that have been released. So when I tried to put my top 3 list together, I actually had a hard time. And it's very different than my mid-year list. I think in my top 3, there's only one album that was in my top 5 in the on my mid-year list. And I probably had a solid 20 plus albums to kind of go through to figure out what I thought were the best 3. So what the album I got at number 3 just came out back on November 12th. This album came out, and that is "Songs of a Lost World" by The Cure. So this is the band's first album in 16 years. So I think the best way to compare this, or the best album from The Cure to compare this to, is "Blood Flowers." And I think this is Blood Flowers is probably, I think, before this album was released, I thought Blood Flowers was the band's best album since Wish. And this is, like I said, very musically, it's very similar to Blood Flowers. It's got the same producer on the 2 albums, but I think the songs overall are better. It's a darker album. This album was heavily influenced by the death of Robert Smith's mother and brother a few years back. I wasn't expecting this album to be this good. Typically, when a band goes 16 years without releasing an album, it's not that great. And my expectations weren't all that high until I heard 6 of these songs on their tour last year. And I was really impressed with the songs in that concert. But, sometimes a song being played live can be very different than what shows up on the album. So, like I said, great album. I did a review on the channel. I think I gave this a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It didn't blow my mind or anything, but I really enjoyed it for what it's worth.
So actually, this was the first album from The Cure since, I think it was The Head on the Door, that the album was fully composed and written by Robert Smith.
So for me, 2024 there's a lot of stuff that came out this year, but for me, a lot of it was forgettable. Yeah. I had a hard time even making a list of 3. I mean, you've mentioned a few. I'm like, oh yeah, there's that, and I forgot about that. This year, I've spent a lot more time trying to introduce myself to music from the past that I was unfamiliar with. I didn't really focus a lot on the new stuff this year.
Yeah.
So my list is pretty basic, but my number 3 is the Decemberists. I don't even remember the titles. As It Ever Was, So Will It Be. It's a good album. It's way better than their last album. Is it their best album? No. But it's a good album, and it's a standout for this year for me. I wasn't blown away by this year's releases overall. I mean, not a lot of it spoke to me. But then again, like I said, I wasn't focusing a lot on the new stuff. I was trying to, look backwards and see the stuff that I've missed over the years.
Yeah, there was only when the album was released, I'd listened to the first couple of singles that were released off of it, and they're really good. It's just an album I didn't go back through. I've never been a big fan of the Decemberists, so I wasn't drawn into the album like that. But from what I listened to, I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean it's been a few years since their last one was released. Now, they released an EP in between that was really good. Actually, I like the EP better than I like this album overall. But like I said, this was more a return to form than their last album.
The album that I got at number 2, I didn't have anywhere on my radar. When this album was announced, I thought the first single was okay. Well, it took me a little while to listen to the first single. Once I did, I was like, oh, this is pretty good. And it kind of gave me hope for the album. And then I listened to the album, and I was blown away by how good this album is. And that is From Zero by Linkin Park. So this one just came out a couple of weeks back. So this is the band's first album with Emily Armstrong replacing Chester Bennington, which, it's always going to be hard to replace such a huge part of your band like Chester was.
Right. Especially after a death rather than just someone leaving.
Yes, yeah. And what I didn't want to see them do, I didn't want to see them do what AC/DC did, which was, Bon Scott dies. Okay, let's go find somebody that sounds like Bon Scott, which is what Brian Johnson basically is. That's how he became the singer of that band. I didn't want to see Linkin Park do that because I didn't want them to be just a bad copycat version of what they used to be. Because regardless of what they did on this album, what they do in the future, their music is always going to be compared to that early period with Chester as part of the band. And what Emily brings to on this album, she's able to, her and Mike Shinoda are able to play off each other vocally in ways that he was never able to do with Chester. And it's an album that's been met with widespread acclaim. It's hit number 1. I think it was like 12 different countries. It hit number 1. It's number 2 on the Billboard charts here in the U.S. And actually, this album I just read a couple of days ago was so it claimed all top 10 spots on there's the Billboard Hot Hard Rock track or chart.
Right.
Had all top 10 songs on that list. So that's kind of cool. It's a great album. If you're a Linkin Park fan, even if you're not a Linkin Park fan, I definitely recommend checking this album out.
I'm not. I mean, I don't have anything against Linkin Park. I'm not a big huge fan, but I'm curious because I haven't listened to anything. I haven't heard the single. I haven't heard anything with her on it. So I'm curious to give it a listen.
It definitely gives. When you listen to this album, sonically, it sounds like a Linkin Park album while also not sounding like a Linkin Park album. And that's why I like that they went in a completely different direction musically or vocally on this album.
So my number 2 is probably not a big surprise because we've talked about it in the previous shows, but it's No Name by Jack White. I really like this album. To me, you kind of equate it to more with the White Stripes stuff.
Yeah.
I see it as kind of a Blunderbuss follow-up.
And the reason
Blunderbuss is a lot. That was his first solo album after White Stripes. So,
but why I say White Stripes is because it's more of a straightforward garage rock, straightforward blues rock album.
Right.
More so than his last couple of albums.
Yeah, and maybe that's what I like about it. But since Blunderbuss, I really like Lazaretto. The one that came out after that, which we've commented, I can't remember. We'll call it the Cider House Rules. I did not like that one at all. And like I said previously, it's listenable, but that's about the extent of it. The 2 previous albums that he released last year or 2 years ago? The first one I really like. The second one I didn't like quite as much. But
I think a lot of people were the opposite.
Exactly. And I see why. I can definitely see the difference there. Yeah. But this is really, to me, this is Jack White at his best doing his thing. Nothing overly experimental, but nothing...
It's just a good, straightforward rock
album. And it really was kind of a highlight for me this year. Like I said, I was really, I don't know if I feel like out of the loop, but I just really felt like I wanted to, try and find stuff that existed before that I never found. So, as far as new stuff goes, this was high on my list.
Yeah. So I guess the funny thing is about the album I've got at number 1 is I was not expecting to enjoy this album. And I listened to it. So the day it came out, actually, I think it was the day it came out. I was on my way to the record store, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot this album was coming out today." So I just kind of tossed it on. I listened to 2 songs off of it, and I was like, "Okay, well, I gotta buy a copy of this." I went to the record store, didn't have anything. I ended up having to get it. I think it was only available through her website. Is where I had to find a copy of it. But it is East Side of Eden by Gen Pop. Her real name is Jen Razavi. I think if you look on streaming services, it's under Gen Pop. So she is half of the lead vocalist for the punk rock band, the Bomb Pops. So listening to songs from the Bomb Pops, I was never a fan of the songs that she wrote. Polly Van Dam was the other vocalist. I always liked her songs a little bit better. So I wasn't really expecting to like what's on this album. And when I went to listen to it the first time, I was thinking it was going to be like the stuff that she did with the Bomb Pops. It's very different than that. It's very much more like a singer-songwriter. There's acoustic stuff on here. There is a couple of those punk-ish kind of songs, but it's not what dominates this album. And it's much more introspective than anything that she did with Bomb Pops. It's a very personal album. It's a good listen from beginning to end.
Yeah, it's nice when, especially with punk, because punk by nature is kind of intended to be more direct and simple.
Yeah.
It's not really simple, but it's simple by comparison to some other stuff. So it's nice when punk artists kind of go out of their comfort zones.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work, but it's nice to see it when it does happen.
And I think it definitely worked on this one. So the first couple of times I listened to this album, I remember thinking to myself, it sounds familiar, but I couldn't really like put my finger on it. And then I was reading there was some comments online I was reading about the album, and someone said that it sounds like similar to like a Bangles album from the 80s. And I instantly thought, that's exactly what it is. It has that very strong, I mean, it doesn't sound like a Bangles album, but it has that kind of vibe, I think, to the album.
Which you say that, and I guess that could bring up connotations of like poppiness and kind of commercialism.
There is some of that to this album.
I've always noticed with the Bangles, there's an artistic sincerity to the Beatles, the Bangles music that kind of gets lost in the whole walk like an Egyptian, state of affairs. So if that's what you're talking about, that kind of more artistic sincerity, I would think I'd probably like that a lot. So my number one for the year was actually one I totally forgot about until today when I was looking through lists of stuff. And it's kind of an out of nowhere album, I suppose. It's the debut album of the band Albion, which was formed by I guess you call him an interim guitarist for Jethro Tull. He was a member of the band for one album and two or three tours. But he went off and started his own band, and it's called Albion. And the name of the album is Lake Songs from Elbid. Very kind of rock, folk, English folk sound to it. There's some acoustic stuff. There's some harder rock elements, but it's all in that kind of English folk style. I mean, somewhat akin to what Jethro Tull used to do. Yeah. But a little more rock.
Like late 70s Jethro Tull? Or?
In a sense, kind of blending that folkiness to the rock side. But whereas Tull did a bit more with the folkiness at that time, they're doing a bit more with the rock, and the folk is kind of an underlying thing. But it's a really good album. And it's rare to find a group that does that blend, especially nowadays. There just isn't a lot of bands doing that. There's definitely a lot of genre crossing, but not those two genres, rock and folk. So it was nice to find a group doing that and doing it well. It's a really good album. I look forward to seeing what they do going forward. They did just release a new single this week. I haven't listened to it yet, so we'll see what happens.
Did the album just recently come out?
It came out in April, I think.
Okay,
April
so earlier this year. Okay.
Yeah, it was early this year. That's why it kind of fell off my radar because of all the other stuff I've been trying to explore. Yeah. But it's a really good album, and if you get a chance, you should check it out if you like that kind of sound.
Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Love to know what you guys have as your top 3 albums of 2024. I thought it was a great year, and I plan on doing an expanded list on one of my videos here coming up here soon. I'll do a top 10. It'll probably end up being a top 15 or so. But, I'd love to know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you see a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And that's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.